Hello, interwebs. I hope you're all doing well. And I am here and I have the great honor to be talking to the wonderful Bill Wolkoff, who many of you may know a bunch of his work. I mean, most certainly you know his work, considering this my channel and what I talk about on this channel, as he is one of the producers on and writers on Star Trek Strange New Worlds, but also another show that I really, really love that I have not had a chance to talk too much about. And that is him being an executive producer on Kipo and the Age of the Wonderbeast. So, Bill, thank you so much for being on here. I'm so excited to have you.
Uh, Thank you, Jesse. I'm thrilled to be here. This is fun for me to get to chat with you. Hello.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was great. It's just funny to actually talk to. We were talking right before we started. I hit record, but it was just it's nice to talk to you because we met at Aaron McDonald, who's the science advisor for Star Trek's wedding just a few weeks ago, and it was like a dark bar, and I'm also like had a few drinks in me, so I was just like ranting at you about Kipo for like 50 minutes. So it's nice to actually talk to you where I'm not a weird human being in a social setting.
We were all crammed together at the wonderful Dr. Aaron and Aaron's wedding. But yes, it's hard to have a real conversation that you're not like playing the tapes back in your head saying, did I say that? Did I say that weird, awkward thing? Which, you know, I'm sure like I do all the time.
Literally, that's my entire life is literally just like, oh God, they must hate me. What stupid thing did I say? That's you just described basically my entire life. But yeah, no, it was cool to meet you there because I was literally wearing the Star Trek Strange New Worlds outfit. That was like it was a cosplay wedding. And so I was wearing that, and we started talking about Strange New Worlds, but then you mentioned like, oh, I also worked on Kipo. And then my friend and I who were there, we just ranted at you about Kipo, which I'm sure you probably didn't expect considering I was wearing the Strange New World stuff.
I I was delighted to meet another Kipo fan, and I think also the reason I didn't expect it was we Kipo was released entirely during the year of 2020 in the midst of the big quarantine when nobody was going out and seeing anybody. So my brain is forgetting, oh yeah, a lot
People
of
saw
people in the
it.
world saw Kipo, and like in my head it's like, God, that's the thing that I did a couple years ago that I love dearly and is still very near dear to me, but it feels so far in the past. So I was thrilled to get to have a real conversation with a person in real life about Kipo, which I only got to talk to people about that virtually for the last couple of years. So
Yeah,
that was
it's gonna be weird, especially like with having made that show in quarantine, but then also the fact like you're working so far ahead, especially in animation, like you're working on like all this stuff all at once. Like even right now you're doing live action stuff, and I'm sure you're working on Strange New World season 2, which like just finished season 1 for all of us. So it's just got to be like a weird time dilation thing to just sort of encounter that.
very weird time dilation thing. Animation has to be produced very far in advance, as
Hmm.
I'm sure you know.
Hmm.
And on top of that, Netflix has at that or when Kipo came out, Netflix had a lot of other shows that were in line before us to premiere. It's like kind of like
Getting
finding
the
your
queue.
getting in the queue. It's like it's like having the runway clear for you. You need a
Mhm.
runway for them to do a little bit of buildup about the show before the show launches. And we were sitting on the runway in our spot for probably about like a year, I think. And the show was completely finished. So
It's
yeah, it is. um, and then when it was coming out, it was talking to people in interviews about it as if it had just come out and we had just done it.
it's like just last week we were doing this whole thing. Yeah. Yeah, it's gotta be it's the behind the scenes and how all of this stuff works is really interesting. And speaking of which, I wanted to talk to you. We'll listeners, we'll get to Star Trek, I promise you, because I know that's what a lot of you are here for, but I'm very interested to talk to Bill about just like what you've been doing and how you got into doing all this, and especially Kipo. So I just wanted to ask you first, like, what's your career like? How did you get into doing Star Trek and also Kipo, and sort of what was that trajectory? Because I was looking at your IMDb just to sort of like remind myself of what you've worked on, and you've done like a bunch of stuff. Like you worked on The Closer, apparently, G.I. Joe Renegades, Tron Uprising, Star Wars Rebels, Once Upon a Time. So you've had a storied, no pun intended, I guess pun intended, history as a writer. So I'm curious, like how you got into doing this.
I love that you saw The Closer in
It's
my credits.
it's literally one episode of The Closer. And it's just like a fascinating like jump in your IMDb because it's like so different from everything else you've done. Not that that's a bad thing. It's just fascinating.
I'll give you a quick fun fact about that. That is not The Closer that you're thinking. You're probably thinking the Kira Sedgwick The Closer.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
That is a Tom Selleck sitcom from the late 90s called The Closer that came out before the Kira Sedgwick The Closer. It was only, I think it was 9 or 10 episodes. And I was a writer's assistant on that show. And I had pitched an episode to the showrunners. Before, this was when I was just figuring myself out as a writer.
Sorry, and bright-eyed, and yeah.
I had no idea what I was doing, and I had no business pitching an episode. And they were vicious to me, and they like tore it to pieces. Rightly so. They were completely right to do that because I had, I was a little too ambitious for myself at that point.
That's a good thing, though, I would think. Yeah.
But the showrunners admired that I had taken taken that initiative and saw that there was a there. So they assigned me a freelance episode of that show, but it was also the day that the show got canceled that I got assigned that freelance episode.
Well, I might as well just go all out, I guess.
But we got to make it. And it wound up being the last episode of that show. And it was my first professional credit. But it was a very interesting, odd show. It was starred Tom Selleck as an ad executive who had gone through a bad divorce, and his daughter moves back in with him. And Ed Asner was in it, the great Ed Asner, David Krumholtz, Penelope Ann Miller. It had a very Gregory Itzin, for any 24 fans out there. He was the bad president in, I think, season 4, season 5.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So it was my first time writing something. But the episode also had to be written in one day. The network said that we're canceling the show. We want you to finish this episode, and it has to be written in a day, which meant that my first professional credit was group written by the entire writing staff. And I only got to write one scene of it.
Oh, God.
This is like behind the scenes of like, what's really real in Hollywood. But that was a great experience about learning how to make television very quickly. And I basically used that script fee to live for a year. And I lived very frugally for a year, and I just wrote for a year. I stopped working working in television in support staff because it took up so much time. I hadn't really figured out how to write yet. So I took that script fee and I lived on Trader Joe's $3.99 burritos for like lunch and dinner every day.
I know those burritos well. Yeah.
They're very good.
They are. Trader Joe's is excellent, especially if you're trying to just survive in LA.
It's a great writer. It's a great writer's diet. And that in that year, I spent the entire year writing, and I got much better. I think that was the year that I really became a writer. And out of the end of that year, that was when I had a screenplay, a very angsty, indie, weird relationship comedy, a very odd relationship comedy that got into the LA Film Festival Screenwriters Lab. It was called. It was actually called the Film Independent Screenwriters Lab at that time, and that led to me working in animation. Believe it or not, I went through that. The movie, that script never got made.
There's a lot of like Hollywood scripts don't get made. Yeah.
there's a whole there's a whole saga about that, but I'll skip ahead to, though the script never got made, the film lab, they try to help you find a footing in the industry, and the script wound up on the desk of a Disney executive who was looking to bring on a writer for a movie called The Wild, which was also not a great movie. That was another one of my early credits. It was a movie that came out at a troubled time in Disney's history. But I wound up working on that movie for 3 years as a kind of as a junior writer because of this, which was also kind of odd to me, that a very, like, bizarre, non-linear script all about emotion. It was a comedy, so it was funny, but it was, it was about raw, deep emotions, and it was very messy. And it's the farthest thing in the world from a kids movie, but it got me a job working on a kids movie. So I worked, and that was an animated movie. The Wild is basically the same movie as Madagascar, to be frank.
So I didn't know that they took it from you.
Well, I didn't know that. Well, that's another saga, but like, DreamWorks and Disney had a history of trying to outdo each other with movies.
Like twin movies, and always like, yeah.
Yes, starting with Ants and Bugs Life. Ants came out before Bugs Life. Shark Tale came out before Finding Nemo. Well, when Madagascar was coming out at the end of the Eisner era, I mean, I think what it was he said, wait a minute, we have a script about a giraffe and a lion and an anaconda and a koala that escaped from the Central Park Zoo and go to Africa. And they tried to get that one out first. And so I was hired to work with the director and rewrite the script. But I learned the movie was not a success for many reasons. But for me, it taught me about the animation process, and it taught me how to work with animators. And again, it was just trial by fire and working in the trenches. So I learned, there was an education working on that movie. I then had a lot of skills to work in animation, and I started working in animation. And I was still writing, spec pilots and spec features. I'm a big, I'm a nerd.
I wouldn't have caught that from your background. I think it's very, very played straight. I don't see any nerd stuff back there at all.
You probably wouldn't see. Yeah, you probably wouldn't notice that. I think Star Trek is one of my very early nerddoms, as was Doctor Who. I was a huge classic Doctor Who fan. I had videotaped every single episode that aired in the United States.
Oh, dang. Oh, that's awesome.
Back when videotape was a thing, when I was a wee little one.
That was me too. I used to record VHS tapes of Star Trek Enterprise and Quantum Leap at the same time, because I became a big Bakula stan. So anytime there was a rerun of that. So anyway, sorry, just an aside. It's just like, yeah, you're reminding me of my VHS day.
It was a beautiful thing. Then you'd pull the tab off the recorder, so that way it didn't accidentally get recorded over.
Yep, exactly. Yep, I know exactly that bit. And I think they're still in a basement somewhere with like all the old commercials and just like Quantum Leap, but I didn't know an episode title, so it was like Quantum Leap, one with Evil Leaper or whatever it was. So where like he's in the body of a girl or whatever. It was just like weird descriptions on there.
He did jump into women's bodies often.
He did.
It was a big thing.
He did. I'm sure it didn't inform anything about my life at all. Like, I was not resonating with it in any way, shape, or form.
I now I want to revisit this, but I remember he always had like a whoa, look on his face when he would do that, which says some weird. I'm not sure it says the right things, but
it's one of those. Yeah, exactly. It's one of those shows, and I'm very curious to see, because I know they're doing a reboot of it soon. I think this year, coming out soon, which I'm excited. But it's one of those shows that I want to go back and revisit, because it's like I feel like the show's heart is always in the right place, but like you're probably some moments where you're like, maybe not. But you're like, I understand why you're trying that. It's just always fun with those types of shows. Anyways, I didn't mean to cut you off. You so big
that's all right.
type of fan.
So I was writing genre pilots, and that got me into TV animation writing, more so than having worked on The Wild. The Wild did not lead to my next job, but it was my own original work. But then the skills that I had learned on The Wild really helped me thrive in the world of animation.
I mean, it's all about balancing, like you like pursuing your own goals and your own like creativity while also being like, look, I can learn how to be on these things and on these sets. So
yeah, exactly. And especially, in working with storyboard artists, which is a massive part of the animation process.
I would expect.
Writers and storyboard artists work very, in an ideal world, they don't always on shows, but in an ideal world, if they're working closely together, I think the end product, it gets elevated highly as a result of it. And so I learned those skills, and was also figuring out what I had to say about the world and the kinds of things I wanted to say about the world. My earlier scripts were just about being an oddball that doesn't fit in, and trying to fit into a world that makes you want to be something that you're not. So thematically, a lot of my early spec scripts were about that. But I wound up working on through those scripts. I got to work on some big franchise animation. I did a show called Tron Uprising,
which I remember seeing, which was also fun because I was a huge fan of Tron Legacy. So I was like, I heard after they made that show, I was like, they're gonna do an animation. I'm like, yes, I wanted to know more. So yeah.
That was one of the biggest creative joys at that time that I had ever, been a part of, and got to work with some incredible artists. At that time, I think Disney wanted to make they wanted to have their own Star Wars, and they were trying to, so they pulled Tron out, dusted it off, and said like, bring
out Bruce Boxleitner, we'll get him out here.
Yep, we dusted off Bruce Boxleitner, who's awesome.
Oh no, it's great. I'm rewatching Babylon 5 right now. I'm like, oh, I forgot how much I love this man. He's wonderful.
He is incredible. And just incredible to work with. But so they through Legacy and through our show, that was their big plan. But at the end of the day, Tron, and I love Tron deeply. It's always been kind of a cult underground thing that people discover and say, oh my God, there's this amazing thing. It's never been the big, franchise that immediately, everybody in the world goes to see. And
which is funny because it's a franchise that like presages, and it's still to this day, like it kind of says a lot about what we're dealing with, things like with the metaverse and like reality and gaming. Like it's stuff that's speaking to that, and it's still even the original film still kind of ahead of its time in some of those aspects, and anti-corporatism as well. So
the original film is shockingly prescient, and has one of my favorite soundtracks of all time by the great Wendy Carlos. So I got to work on that, and I worked on Star Wars Rebels, and I was kind of in that world. Those jobs led to me working on Once Upon a Time, which was an ABC show that was on in the 2010s.
I believe I remember it well because I was in college during that time, and I had a lot of friends that were very, very into the show, so they adored it. So I was never in the fandom directly, but I was like tangentially related to the fandom, where I would just hear a lot about it. I'm always like, there's so many things happening on this show. It's great.
For me, it was the next step in like working on shows that had big mythologies and big backstories, but that we still wanted to tell new stories and reinvent those mythologies in a modern way. So like it was like with Tron had a huge mythology. Obviously, Star Wars Rebels had a huge mythology. Once Upon a Time is all about reinventing mythology, and so that kind of became what I was known for in that world, and I was still very much interested in animation, and had been trying to develop animation, and an executive at DreamWorks, and I had not worked for DreamWorks at this point, sent me the webcomic for Kipo. And it was the webcomic was just one edition. It was one issue. And it was created by Rad Seacrest, who is who's a storyboard artist for features, a head of story on big DreamWorks movies, but he'd never done television before. And so my experience in animation and also in live action made me an appealing pair, and for Rad. And when I read the webcomic, I immediately fell in love with the drawing style 100%. And I said, oh my God, I love it. And I love the idea behind the world, but I also really loved the characters. And I think what I responded to so much was Kipo, the webcomic very consciously took place in a post-apocalypse after animals have mutated out of control. And it's an indeterminate time in the future, and they run rampant, and humans mostly live underground. But the part of town was the same part of town that I lived in. It was the east side of Los Angeles.
That's one of the joys I love about the show, is just like slowly unveiling, like, oh, especially in the first season, where it's like, oh, this is LA. This is exactly where they are, and just setting it right within there. I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like going literally to the observatory in one episode and all that. Yeah, it's like, wow, it's like, dang, this was so cool.
And in the webcomic, the people looked like our Los Angeles today in a way that you at that time when I was reading it, which was 2016, actually 2015, I think was when it was sent to me. We didn't see a lot of that kind of representation in animation. And I thought, what a great opportunity. If they really want me to do this, are they going to let us keep these characters and tell this story in an LA that looks like the LA that I know, that is not represented on screen, in both race and also sexual identity, and at that, and I'm lucky because I came into Kipo at and making Kipo at the right time. We would never have been able to have a young queer character on Tron Uprising or on any of the other shows that I had worked on, and or Rebels even. And there were creators behind me that tried to like have those characters and fought hard and were shot down. But when we came in, Netflix wanted a something that would occupy the prestige kids space, which didn't really exist, but like they want, like, we're in the prestige space for adults, but like we want to try something like more prestige-y for kids. And we got to do that with Kipo. And so we were, not only were we encouraged, we were enabled to be very explicit and have a young Black queer character as part of our main cast. And that's not.
Oh, sorry. No, please. I mean, I just loved that character, and also his like very understated coming out as well, which I also really loved. Where it's just like I think it's in it was like episode 7 or 8, one of the early episodes of season 1, where he just sort of casually states, I'm gay, and it's like not a big deal. It's an awkward moment for Kipo because Kipo sort of has feelings for him, but it is sort of moved on and just accepted and not like made a big dramatic moment. It was very wonderful, I thought.
Thank you. That was, we wanted to handle it in a way that it was who he was, but it wasn't all that who he was. It was a part of his identity. And we wanted to tell a coming out story in a way that felt real to us. And it's also part of Kipo's growth, because that episode was an episode where Kipo was just turning 13, and she was just starting to develop feelings, and here's this other person lavishing all this attention on her because it's her birthday. And like any young person would, like, you attach more meaning to that, and not like, so she started to, in that moment, feel these really strong feelings for him, and he's a little bit older and said, oh my God, I didn't mean to, like,
Get
I
it,
think
yeah.
He wasn't trying to mislead her. He was just like trying to like let her, this is the apocalypse, you should, like,
you should enjoy yourself, everyone.
Yes.
Like, actually celebrate yourself. Yeah. And I also, oh, sorry, please.
Yeah. So that's that. And when he came out, it was, like, listen, I think you're awesome, but you should know I'm gay. And for her, it was, like, it wasn't about like, oh, I'm pining for him. It was like, I'm feeling these feelings, but I'm also have this like strong friendship, and she's just very grateful for the friendship of it. And that was really the story that felt real to us, to me at least.
No, it is. I mean, what I love about it too, not even just the matter of factness of it, you sort of describe it as a coming out, but it's also like he already knew this information beforehand. Like a lot of, especially with young like kids animation shows, when you do have a coming out scene, and it's awesome to see that representation, but it is like about that character discovering it and then coming out to others about it. But here you have a character who already knows that, and you get to show him like sharing that with someone else with a confidence that's not like is this who it's like, no, I'm gay, and it's just very matter of fact stated, which is something that I don't really see too often, at least up until this point, in kids media. I'm starting to see it a little bit more with things like another Netflix show, Dead End Paranormal Park, had a trans character as well, who's just like, I'm trans. So I think I like seeing that shift, and I thought that was one of the first times I've really seen that was on Kipo. Sorry to speak for you. I'm talking at you about your show, but
you're absolutely. I mean, you're very perceptive, and I'm glad that was your takeaway. But yeah, because he wasn't hiding that he was gay. It hadn't come up. It was, and they moved past it. And they, they were good for and he goes on to have a relationship with another character over the course of the series. And we had a lot of, it was funny. I was worried that they were never going to let us do it, but they wanted us to do it. And I do want to credit Peter Gal, who is one of the DreamWorks executives, and he said, you need to be explicit about this, and we want him to hear him say the words, I'm gay, out loud. And both Rad and I were like, what? Really? Okay. Are we having this conversation? Because this is it's usually the opposite.
No, it's fascinating. This is just, I interviewed Hamish, who runs Dead End Paranormal Park. He's the executive producer on that, and he had a very similar thing too, where he also said, he was like, I knew this character was trans, but I didn't want to say it. And then apparently, like, people that he was working with, like, you can just say that. He's like, oh, okay. And it's interesting just to hear that connection between the two of you, because it speaks to, like, I think how long it has been hard to get those stories out, but also how there's a big shift, but also the fear as a writer about, like, the pressures and things like that. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that, because it's interesting to hear you feel that same sort of like, oh, we can actually do this feeling.
I almost feel guilty in that I didn't have to fight for it. Like, because I had previously been on shows where we just couldn't, we had to stay away from anything approaching that. And I know that at DreamWorks at the same time, N.D. Stevenson, who created She-Ra, and that was also very much, a story about lesbian queer relationships. That was a battle. They had to fight for that, and they won, but they had to fight, and
only even then it's still, and I love She-Ra. It only gets made explicit in the towards the end of the series too, as something that's more upfront as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that speaks to, and partly that is because She-Ra has a a franchise behind it.
Yeah, yeah.
That is also, I think, this is my theory. I've never talked to ND about this, but I having worked in this business long enough, I'm sure, you know, the
is this going to mess with the brand? Yeah, those conversations.
Yeah. And we didn't have to have the, you know, like we were told, go, you know, go ahead. The only thing that they and we didn't really have to fight for it. We just had to sell them on it, was how we were going to play the romance between Benson and Troy, because DreamWorks previously had never shown any romance, straight or gay, or in their or very seldomly showed that kind of romance in their
like animation.
Yeah. For television, at least. It's not something that they did. And
that's interesting that the conversation wasn't about the queerness of it all, just the romance of it all. That's actually fascinating.
Yeah. So we had to walk them through how, you know, that would play out. And this is still going to be a comedy forward show with epic adventure in it. And it's also going to have, but it's also a show about these young people growing up, this found family growing up, and the pathos of growing up in an apocalypse. So romance is going to come out. So, but that was, you know, they needed to wrap their heads around that. So I when Kipo came out, we got a lot of praise for being like one of the first kids cartoons to have a character explicitly say I'm gay. And I'm glad that you know, we got to do that, and proud of that. But I also want to credit all of the people who fought so hard for years before me and were shot down and never got to do it. And we didn't have to fight for that. Like they let us do it, and this was a great opportunity that lined up with thematically what I wanted to talk about in this show, and also lined up with, like, again, which I would say is presenting a tapestry of people in Los Angeles that I recognized and that I didn't see on screen.
And I mean, that it kind of goes towards sort of building upon that. It goes towards what the themes of the show are, because it is a show just about building coalitions with different people and building across bridges of difference to see people as like people, despite, like, you know, surface level differences, or in Kipo's case, the fact that like different types of mutes. But the whole message is like we're all people that can and see each other and sort of bridge those gaps, and Kipo becomes that character. And I think like talking about that sort of story without showing a diverse group of actual human people in it as well, I think it would have been missing a trick. And I think it makes it much stronger overall as a show. And I think that it's a really powerful theme that I just really love seeing. So yeah, can you talk about that a little bit, like how you got into theme of like this sort of building bridges and coalitions through empathy, like Kipo being like a radical empathic character, which is always my favorite type of character, by the way. So
absolutely. I got Kipo, I got the webcomic in 2015 and was really working on it in earnestness in 2016 when it looked like Trump was going to be elected. There was so much ugliness in our world, and like you could see it coming, and you could see that it was not going away, and it felt like the beginning of end times. And I grew up in the 1980s, and I remember being very worried about the world blowing up because nuclear war was a real threat in the early 80s. And so I felt like now is a good time to revisit end times, that though nuclear war isn't the threat, but like our world ripping itself apart through ugliness and fear and hatred is I feel like is a potentially society ending threat. And in the webcomic, Kipo was very, was able to see wonder in this apocalypse. And that was just in one issue. And I emotionally locked onto that. And I'm like Kipo. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I saw her as being this great vessel for somebody who emerges in a world that is completely torn apart and some people see as a wasteland and is legitimately very dangerous, and there is amity and discord everywhere, and she is able to see the wonder in it, and also that we shouldn't go back, that there's progress that has been made, and she, Kipo sees the world as a place where we need to not fight with the mutes. The mutes are the animals that have mutated out of control that now roam and partially control the surface, but embrace them and embrace that change and that difference and move forward together and redefine like not being afraid to see a world that feels unrecognizable, and saying, oh, you know what, this is different than the world that I knew, but there's also beauty and wonder in this, and we should embrace that and move forward into it. Thematically, those were the things that I wanted to that interested me, and these are the things that I talked about with Rad very, very early on when we were building out his webcomic into a show. I got to work with him on it for a whole year before we brought it to Netflix, while the 2016 election was going on, and I could just see the rise in prejudice, fear, transphobia, homophobia everywhere, and it felt like this is the right time to have a character to push up against that, have a character who is kind and who is and has, I love the word radical empathy, and who has radical empathy, and see, could that radical empathy survive against radical cynicism?
Yeah, because I was just about to get to Amelia, who I thought was such a fascinating character, because you make clear in her flashback that like she has always been this way, and she has never really been able to see others as full people, and just showing that as like a core of who she is. I thought it was just an important message, because it puts Kipo against a character who she can't necessarily change with that radical empathy, and how do you deal with that? And I think that's an important message, because it is important to say like we can reach out with empathy with characters like Scarlemagne and say like we can change them and see growth, but also sometimes there has to be people that just has to be pushed against, because they're not going to change and they'll take advantage of that empathy. I thought that was just a really cool message that again I don't often see a lot, and I think it's a nuance that I think people miss a lot, even though the character is inherently unnuanced in terms of their viewpoint. The disagreement between that and how that push and pull goes, I think, is a really nuanced thought.
I'm very impressed with your reading of the show. I mean, that was I haven't had these conversations with the people. These are conversations that we had in the writers' room. We moved the needle with Scarlemagne, and we did not want to move the needle with Dr. Amelia, and very intentionally so. How does that affect Kipo with so, at what point, does she have to become compromised by trying to change somebody who cannot be changed, and who is infecting others and is spreading that fear in others. So those two forces were very intentionally, like we wanted to do a slow, as slow as we could for 3 seasons, redemption for Scarlemagne as he eventually becomes Hugo again. But Amelia, no turning back for her.
Exactly. No, it's a really cool thing, and important to talk about, because it's something like not to make it about myself, but like stuff what I do in like LGBTQ advocacy, where it's like I work a lot to try and educate people and talk about stuff, but then there's people like, I'm not gonna be able to change this person, so how do I incorporate that into trying to be empathetic and have these discussions and trying to be open to educate, but also being like, but there's a line, and it's a constant difficult push and pull that you have to do with yourself, which is what resonated with me about Kipo, just seeing that, being like, oh, because I see myself too a lot in Kipo as a character. Like I adore her so much, legitimately, one of my favorite characters. I told my friend that I was with when we were talking at the bar, like you could ask her, I literally freaked out at every episode because I just adored Kipo so much for that, and I just appreciated seeing that that wrestling in that character, because it meant so much to me to see that. So yeah, no, that message came through and it worked really well for me. So yeah, I thank you for it.
Oh, you're welcome. And it was, you know, you work on so many things in your life, and sometimes they're able to like come out at a time when they're relevant, and at a
Mhm.
time where they resonate. I feel very fortunate that, you know, we got to tell a story that resonated with you. And I mean, I hope that's a barometer for many other, you know, people who are seeing these aspects of themselves in Kipo. And it's, you know, it was also, Kipo came out during the pandemic when
Mhm.
we were all quarantined, and it's about a world
Bringing
of
people together.
humans that
Mhm.
are quarantined underground and hiding underground and staying inside and afraid to go outside. And
Mhm.
it was just one of those happenstances where, oh wow, this show came out like at a time where it really is timely in ways that we never expected it to be
Mhm.
timely.
Well, it speaks to, I mean, the pandemic, like the actual like COVID-19 of it all aside, it speaks to how that the pandemic sort of just highlighted and underscored a lot of the things that I think all of us were feeling that you were drawing upon for Kipo. So I think it did really come out at such a great time. And I know we have a little bit of time, so I do want to get to Star Trek too, but I will just say something else that I did really love about the show is the style. I mean, we talked about the story, but just like the music and the visuals, just the like the purples and blues and just the color look of it. I think is also just so unique. And I think that was just such a cool direction for the show. So I just wanted to at least mention that. So
Well, I will thank you and credit Rad Seacrest
mhm,
for the style of the character. All credit to him. The style of the characters are from
mhm.
his. He has a very unique
Particular.
angular drawing style, and it was an effort to make that animatable too on a TV schedule.
I would bet. Yeah.
And also our art director Angela Sung Mueller, who is a genius, and um, made Las Vistas a real world, and just generated painting after painting after painting that I just wanted to live inside of. And
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. I love that that art style so well. So if you haven't noticed, I like purples and blues a little bit. So it kind of works out.
Yeah, well, and that thematically was a big, you know, color scheme
Mm.
for keep Purple Jaguar Eye.
Yeah, yeah.
Was her song when her paw finally came out.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's great. Um, I just there was I'm trying to remember. I think there was one more thing that I wanted to mention, but I might be forgetting. Uh, yeah, for some reason escaping me. Well, so I'll just move on to my next bit, which is so to sort of talk about Star Trek. How did you get from Kipo into Star Trek? Like, what was that shift? I mean, I can already see in terms of your like the themes that you're interested in, they connect really well with Kipo being like this radical empath and wanting to create diverse groups of people. That's a very Star Trekian kind of theme. So is that what like led to Kipo, or so what was the behind the scenes of going from there to here to steal from Enterprise?
So I had been working on Kipo for many years, and when I was done, the show we were like doing like little bits of post here and there, but I was basically done with the show, and I wasn't going to come out for more than a year.
Mhm.
And I I really wanted to get back into live action,
Mhm.
just as a change of pace. And I wrote a and Kipo hadn't come out, so I couldn't really use that to jump to the next job. So I wrote a
Mhm.
brand new spec pilot that was it was a grounded sci-fi pilot about a broken family forced back together, and um, it was the perfect writing sample for this show called Man Who Fell to Earth,
That's right.
which
Yeah, I saw you also work on that as well. Yeah.
and and I knew the some people at the company that were making Man Who Fell to Earth, and I asked them if they would consider, you know, read my spec and consider me for the show, and they said, we know you, we think you're great, but we're going to share it with our other partners, and if, you know, we're not going to push you, but if they respond, then we'll bring you in. And they did. They brought me in, and it's funny, like it's one of those things where like I always think like when you have an interview for a job, like it's going to take like weeks or like to hear from it. So like I thought it was a good interview. I shook everybody's hand
And then
and
you go back
left,
and
and
sit in anxiety for a
yeah.
few years later.
And
What's
I
happening?
thought it was going to be weeks, but I was in my car, and 10 minutes
damn.
later I got a phone call, and it was my contact at the company, and they said, you got the job. I'm like, what?
Damn. All right.
You're supposed to tell me next week, not right now.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So I wound up I knew it was the perfect writing sample, and a lot of times it's like being at the right place at the right time. And I didn't write that sample for Man Who Fell to Earth, but I knew it would be right for that show. And I was able to get it read, so very fortunate for that. And Secret Hideout is the company that makes Man Who Fell to Earth. And we did we wrote the first round of writing for Man Who Fell to Earth was all right before March 13th, 2020, when the world shut down. And we worked a little bit beyond that, but the production of the show got delayed. And they had that period of writing had elapsed, and they couldn't keep on the writing staff anymore. And I was offered a chance to go up for Strange New Worlds, because Secret Hideout also does all the Star Trek shows. So that was how I got into that world, and I was deep. I mean, like, oh my God, are you kidding me?
Yeah, of course.
Please put me up for that show. So that's how I got into Strange New Worlds, and everybody has a different relationship with Star Trek. My relationship with Star Trek started with the novelizations of the original series episodes that were in my library when I was in grade school. And
the why am I blanking on the name? The animated series ones, or like the log ones?
Yeah, novelizations of the TOS episodes.
Alan Dean Foster, right? Was that who's the writer? I believe. I can't remember off the top of it.
I don't know. They I don't know. He might have written some of them. I don't remember the exact the author names. I just remember but they would I remember reading the novelization of the Corbomite maneuver and Space Seed, and being fascinated. And then I not long after that, and also I was, so then that led me to discovering original series on WFLD in Chicago, and at the end of each episode, you'd see Baylock. I have a Baylock back
right there. Yep, there he is.
You'd see Baylock on the screen. And I was like, when am I going to get when are they going to show the Corbomite maneuver? When am I going to get the Baylock episode? So I kept watching, like hoping it would be and it never was.
Oh no.
I never got to see it on WFLD. Right. I was never watching it at the right time. And not long after that, I saw Wrath of Khan in theaters, and I was completely hooked on Star Trek, and obsessed with it. And I was in high school when Next Gen came out, so I got to watch that in high school. I remember watching that in high school, and I think it was either 1 or 2 years after it come out, or like right around the same time Twin Peaks had come out. And
boy, yeah.
And I was watching that, and I was thinking, this is a really cool time to, for television. Like, I'd never seen stuff like this on television.
It's funny you should mention that. I literally just watched all of Twin Peaks last month. Like,
wow.
I just finished The Return for the first time last month. So anyways, it just a random aside, just coincidental. It's kind of funny you mention it.
So but that was, that's kind of my entry into the Star Trek franchise. So coming into Strange New Worlds, I considered myself a deep fan. And what's great about these shows, our staff, and I think this is probably the case with many of the shows, has very, like, people that all have different relationships to Star Trek. Some people who are brand new to the franchise, and offer perspectives that you would never imagine, and some people who are canon experts and have seen everything. And I thought I was like pretty up there, but like the case compared to some of the canon experts, there were people that knew things that like far outdid me. But I think, if you were to compare me to the average Joe out there, I've got a pretty solid knowledge of Trek.
Yeah, so from there, like you wrote 2 episodes. Well, actually, sorry, one thing I do wish to say, I want to call out I love finding a fellow like friend who got into Star Trek from the novels, because I got into Star Trek from the Star Trek Nemesis audiobook. That's
Oh
how I
yeah.
started. Yeah, literally my dad played the Star Trek Nemesis audiobook for me. I fell in love with that, which is the weirdest place to begin. Then he bought me Next Generation season 7 on DVD, which was The Descent Part 2 was the first episode. So the first episode of like Star Trek that I
Oh
saw,
wow.
The Descent part, not even Part 1, Part 2. So I'm like, I don't know who this lore guy is. There's these weird cyborg people. I don't know what's going on, but it's great. Data's got a weird fingernail thing. It's all very strange. But yeah, so it was a weird adventure. So I always love hearing someone else's like, yeah, I started watching Star Trek from the books. So it's just always a great journey there. But anyways, so writing on the show, you're a producer, but also a writer. And the 2 episodes, correct me if I'm wrong, you wrote I think you co-wrote Children of Illyria, right?
Ghosts of Illyria.
Ghosts
Yes,
of Illyria, excuse me.
I co-wrote that with Kayla Cooper.
And then you wrote Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach, right?
Yes,
And
yes, and
that was
I also co-wrote that one with Robin Wasserman.
gotcha. And that one's also is that one based on a Gene Roddenberry script or an old TOS script? I heard that, but I wasn't exactly sure if that was the case.
It was not based on a
Okay.
Gene Roddenberry script.
Yeah, for some reason I heard that somewhere, and I was like, I couldn't find that anywhere, so I wasn't sure. So good to get that confirmed.
We absolutely drew inspiration from The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas,
That's
which is an Ursula K. LeGuin short story.
I actually, yeah, I caught that when I did my review of the episode. That was definitely I was like, okay, this is very clearly where you're drawing from, the sort of like suffering of like a whole society building of living, getting to survive and getting to thrive based off the suffering of one person, specifically a child. I definitely got that. Let's start with Ghosts of Illyria. Like, what was the genesis of that, and like how'd you come up with that concept?
So we I'll just give you a brief overview of like the writing process.
Mm-hmm.
When we're coming up with the story areas and the concepts, everybody's working together, and we're guided by Henry Alonzo Myers and Akiva Goldsman, our two showrunners. And Henry is more day-to-day in the room. Akiva is a genius, but also does 15 other television shows. So
yeah, of course.
Alas, we don't get to have him every day. But guided by them, we're all working on stories together. And then when then a story after a concept is a story concept is like a 1-page document that we share with all of our network and studio partners. Then we break the story in the room. Each act, our stories are 4 acts and a teaser, and we beat out every story. The whole writer's room is working together, and then Henry and Akiva will assign those episodes to specific writers who will take them and go off to outline, get notes, and then go off to script. So I give that preamble to say that it's a group process with how how we each came up with each episode. And obviously certain, like the genesis of certain episodes are certain people's ideas. But for Ghost of Illyria, sorry for that long-winded.
No, it's good. It's good. It's
credit
good.
The way
it's,
accurate.
Of course. Yeah, no, it's one of those, like, I know that sort of process, but I also, it's good to make sure it's stated, because it's for I don't want to give it misappropriate ideas. So anyways,
the Akiva Goldsman came in and he wanted to tell a story about Una, who is a legacy character that we know very little about prior to Strange New Worlds. All we knew was what we saw in the menagerie, or the cage, how from her character. But there's not a lot of backstory to her in that episode. And there's also suggestions of there's novelizations and original novels that feature her character that I guess would be considered beta canon. But for us, it was kind of a wide open space, and he guided us. He kind of gave us the idea that he wanted to tell a story that she was hiding a secret that put her in opposition with the Federation, which meant so much to her. An organization that she sees all of the ideals that it reaches to, but there's a secret that she has that shines light on a flaw in the Federation and pits her against it. So that was if my memory serves correct, that was the genesis of how we started working on that episode. And I can't remember exactly who it was. In my head, and I could be wrong about this, it was Kirsten Beyer, who was one of our co-executive producers. And Kirsten has worked on many
going all the way back to the novels as well. Speaking of which,
she's written novels and Discovery. She co-created Picard. I think she said, "Oh, in one of the novels, Una's an Illyrian," and there's also been like suggestions that maybe the Illyrians get into have experimented with genetic manipulation and genetic engineering, which because of the eugenics wars, the Federation is very, very much against, and we all kind of knew, that's fast, that's great. Like, so that was kind of the genesis of Una as an Illyrian who passes as human, and who is and who loves Starfleet, but harbors a secret that makes her born a crime in a way, in Starfleet, to steal from the title of Trevor Noah's autobiography. But that was the initial genesis that led to why is she an Illyrian, and I can't remember who it was, but then we thought it would be cool to tell a pandemic story, and that it would be relevant to today, and it is something that Star Trek has often done before. And how can we tell a pandemic story in a way that hasn't been done in Star Trek before? So that's kind of where the light virus came from, and yeah, that was the beginning. But at the end of the day, it is a very deep an emotional Una story that reveals her backstory, and then as we built it out, it also became a really big Mbenga story, and allowed us to. And Mbenga, like Una, is a legacy character who we don't know a lot about, and we have a lot of room to really explore who he is. So that's the beginning of Ghosts of Illyria.
I want to make sure check on time, because I do want to. Do you have like 10 more minutes, 15 more minutes?
Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. So one of the things, speaking on that episode though, like the moment that I really just adored was, I sit down and watch every episode, and I do my reviews of it for my channel. I always take notes, and there's that scene where Una sits down with, or I think she's standing, but she's talking with Captain Pike, and he sort of has that moment. It's like, you're one of the best of us. You're an exemplar for your people. And I was like, oh, I understand that this is Pike trying to support her. But I literally wrote in my notes as I was watching that scene, it's like, oh, so she's one of the good ones. And I was like, I don't know if I really love the writing of that scene. And then the very next scene with Una, she calls that out and says, why do I have to be the best of the best of my people to be deserving of being here? And she literally says, like, I'm one of the good ones in his eyes. But also feeling conflicted by that, because Pike is someone who is standing up for her and being along her side. And again, as soon as I saw that moment, I was like, oh, you're literally critiquing the very thing that I was taking notes on. And I love those moments where there's a nuance in a script that, like, you can see the issues with it, and then the characters start reacting to that and feel that anxiety inside. And so I thought that was just such a wonderful call out and moment within the script. And again, just showcasing those little nuances of stuff. So I'm curious if you have any, what your thoughts are on that moment, because it was just one that like really struck me and was like, okay, this show is really just digging into those nuances of all of this.
I mean, I think that's one of the most important moments of the episode.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's in Ghosts of Illyria, that moment for Pike is him trying in a wrong-headed way to do what he thinks is right, but is like the Federation, even Pike has some he's not perfect, and he needs room to grow and to adjust to the world. We hope that he's able to do
I'm
that.
sure that'll be addressed in season 2, given the cliffhanger of season 1. So I'm sure that's coming out. But yeah, no, it's interesting. So, anyways, sorry, I was just
Yeah, that's it is an extreme, and we talked about that moment for a long time in the writers, and we had many conversations about how to get it right, and how to show someone trying to be an ally, but in virtue of trying to be an ally, being the opposite of an ally in that moment, and how that weighs on Una afterwards as she's speaking into her private log. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the episode would not work without those 2 scenes.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, quite frankly, and I'm not just saying this because it's talking to you, but I mean, I love all the stuff that the season did overall, but I think like that specific moment, or those moments together, I think are some of the strongest of the entire season, again, in a very, very strong season of television. So I think that's saying something. So yeah, no, I thought it was really great. So again, thank you for that, and all the writers who worked on that to come up with that. So moving on. So you mentioned earlier that Left Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach. I believe I'm saying that title right. It's always a low one. Is drawing from Those Who Walk Away from Mommy Laws, again, the Ursula K. Le Guin story. So many long titles. But so how did that concept come about? I mean, obviously, again, group effort, but like what sort of drew you and the writers to want to draw upon that story for this one?
Well, we get to experiment with genres in our show, and because we're largely episodic, there are emotional arcs that we follow through, but but because for the most part we're episodic, we can do very different things in different episodes, and we wanted to tell a romance story, and also a story that makes the audience deeply uncomfortable by confronting an ugly truth. And we thought that would be an interesting way. Like we had stories previously that and I don't think it's a bleak story either. But it is a story that was designed to make people uncomfortable, and how we as a society look at
other cultures,
and treat treat those of us in our world who aren't as lucky and privileged as ourselves. Like, do we really look at it, or do we hide from it and turn away from it? And again, I'm pretty sure it was Akiva who brought up like Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, and said, that kind of touches on some of these issues, and what an interesting way to also tell a romance story. To have the romance be with somebody who is in this other culture that has a very shocking way of dealing with suffering and privilege and class, and they let one child suffer horribly, so that everybody else can be okay. But the devil's bargain that they make is that they have to embrace it, and they have to be a part of it, and they have to look directly into it, and that's the difference between their society and our society.
Oh no, sorry, cutting you off.
Go ahead.
It just made me think, like, just hearing this too. It's an interesting, and I think the entire season, again, this is my read on the show, not necessarily has to be yours, obviously, but it's a show, the entire season sort of like looks at Star Trek and kind of like starts not like deconstructing it necessarily, but like critiquing certain elements of it, like how the Prime Directive is thought of, how this is thought of in certain ways. And that episode, in many ways, number one, used sort of Starfleet and the Federation to sort of do what the Ursula K. Le Guin story is doing, which is sort of like, we're looking at it and judging that society from the outside, which is what the story is trying to do, is like, are we judging it? But then also implicating us within that, because it's like, how is he reacting to his judging and being in part of it? And it's also one other element that I just hearing you talk made me think of is how it's an interesting sort of perversion of one of the core tenets of Star Trek, which is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and you can see how that could be twisted to fit this exact society. The one child is the few in service of the many, and it's like, oh, is that something that we can allow, and sort of like, again, sort of critiquing that very Star Trekian ideal. And I think that's what I really am enjoying Strange New Worlds for, where it's not like tearing it all down. It's like, oh, this needs to be all destroyed. But it's just saying like, oh, here's an interesting way to sort of be critical of this ideology that is just a tenet of the series. And I think that's just a really cool way to deal with it. Again, I'm ranting at you about your own show during your own interview, but I think it's just an interesting concept to play with.
I think you're dead on with your take on how we're looking at it. We want to be able to take risks, but while embracing the spirit of Star Trek, we don't want to be afraid to take risks and try something new. And also look at our world today through the prism of Star Trek. And so we're going to be, telling different kinds of stories and approaching principles and concepts in Star Trek in a way that is different than you would have done in the 90s or in the 60s. That is
as it should. That's what Star Trek is here for, to talk about today, not tomorrow necessarily. It shows us the tomorrow, but it's about today. And I think you're doing that really, really well. So,
and we don't want to we never want to flout our nose at canon.
oh yeah, of course, yeah.
We something that Henry has said often, that that has been a compass for us is, if you're going to do Star Trek, you can't be afraid to break Star Trek. And that doesn't mean we want to, and we're not trying to, but that means we have to take risks. We have to try something that may or may not work. And I hope we make it work every single time. But the nature of a risk is that you're trying something different, and taking big swings.
No, I agree. I mean, that's what I love personally about this era of Star Trek so much. Is that, like, not just Strange New Worlds, but every show, Lower Decks, Discovery, Picard, Prodigy, like all of you all are taking the franchise and being like not afraid to try something new with it. And like sometimes it's a home run, sometimes it has positive negatives, sometimes it doesn't work, but it's always interesting. And I will always take a franchise that is trying to do something interesting each and every time over something that plays it safe every time. And so I again, sorry to like just gush at you, but I as a fan, it is something that I see and appreciate about the franchise. It's a franchise that I care about, but is one that is constantly willing to take a risk. And it's seen, and for me, it's appreciated. And I know that many people do, even though I know there's certain segments of fan bases that always wants the things to be exactly the same and never change. I think what you're doing is a very worthwhile endeavor. I do know I want to be respectful for your time, and then I also have to run as well, unfortunately. But I do want to wrap out. I always try to do this for every interview that I do, and I've already been kind of saying it, and not just to just like make you feel good, but I do think that, like, especially in today where there's so much toxic stuff, creators should hear that they're doing good work. So thank you for all that you do, and like legitimately, I think from Strange New Worlds to Kipo, for me personally, they have both been shows that have brought me a lot of joy, made me think, inspired me as my own creator. To make things and do things, both of those shows. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for making them and for being involved in them. So,
well, thank you. Can I take a moment to gush back at you? And can we
I'll
have like
hide
behind your coffee? I do want to thank you for being such a positive and strong presence on Twitter, and you're inspirational to me, and I'm honored that you wanted to talk to me.
Of course.
and hear what I had to blather on about, and because I think that your presence is so admirable, and it's there's a lot of ugliness in our world, and certainly on Twitter, and
most definitely on Twitter.
I take a lot of lessons from how how you handle all that ugliness. There's no right way to do it. Like
No, it's I mean it's well, first off, thank you. I really do appreciate it. It's always difficult to hear that because it's just as you sort of talked about before, it's about like just trying our best to be kind people and caring people, also knowing that we're living in a world that is not necessarily kind back. And how do we wrestle with that and push for that? And uh, it's always difficult for me, so I'm glad that it's helpful for others. And it's why I want to make sure that people who are inspiring to others, like your work and other people's that you work with, that they know it, because I do know that it affects me seeing all that nastiness and the things that I make, and it's just like I watch stuff and I'm like, it's rough to make this stuff when sometimes you get those vitriolic reactions. So I think it's important for people to know that their work has an effect and that their work is meaningful. And you are doing that. So like legitimately the work you do, I'll just talk, we'll make it a circle. I'll just toss
it's
it
a
right
love
back
fest.
at you. Exactly. Toss it right back at you. Your work is meaningful and wonderful and it's fun and great. So know that it does reach people. And speaking for myself, I know that it means a lot. So thank you for all of it.
Thank you so much. I am going to tell everybody in the Kipo text chain
Please do.
that you said that, and we still talk on the Kipo text chain all these years later.
Oh, that's amazing. That makes me happy. Yeah, please tell everyone, like, Kipo was such a great show. Like legitimately, I told you this when we were there, but when I saw you in person, my friend and we would watch it together at night, and I would literally like I would like literally like just jump up and down at every episode, and like the theme song, like dee dee, I would just like but I would just like sing along with it every time. It's a great show, and I think you did a wonderful job on it. And Strange New Worlds obviously too, but and all of your work, but specifically Kipo, I think it really resonated with me. So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. We'll end the circle of the Love Fest. So I just say again, thank you. Is there anywhere people can follow you, or we want people to promote? Obviously, Strange New World season 2 coming out when it comes out, and then your Twitter or anything, if there's anything you want to promote.
You can find me on Twitter. I am on there. My handle is Flying Lobster with an underscore between flying and lobster. Flying underscore lobster.
Is there a story behind that, by the way? That's a great Twitter handle. I love it.
Yeah. Well, when I joined Twitter, I was a mascot for the LA Derby Dolls. And
yeah.
I dressed in a huge lobster outfit with a flying helmet. So that's where
that's amazing.
That's where the handle came from.
I love it. Awesome. Well, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time, and listeners, thank you so much for your time. And hopefully I'll see you soon.